Welcome to Reclaiming the Republic. This is G.R. Mobley. This show is sponsored by Mobius Strip Press. In 1787, our framers coalesced in Independence Hall, Philadelphia, and they decided to reframe and fix the Articles of Confederation. This is the day we should be celebrating what I would consider scripture. I don't consider this a scripture for the salvation of man. I consider this a scripture for the governance of mankind. And that scripture is our Constitution. Let me start with one of my basic premises. Reasonable people, equally informed, seldom disagree. The real problem that we have is that middle part, equally informed, because I truly believe most people are reasonable. I believe that we have the fringe, the people that you just can't talk to, the ideologues, but I do believe that most people are reasonable, and if you equally inform them or you give them the same foundation, then we should be able to coalesce on those same principles and ideas that help form those same principles and ideas that our framers used. America has finally reached the point, and we have a barrage of different radio shows and different news media outlets and so forth, that everybody recognizes the fact that something is rotten in D.C. There's a lot of conservative entertainers making millions of dollars, and there's a huge industry that some people call the grievance industry, but this grievance industry is making billions. And the reason is because everybody is distracted. Everybody is distracted by the many factors that cause our grievances. Now, let me frame this into a leviathan, because our federal government has become a leviathan. A leviathan is a monster, but it's not just this monolith monster. It has multiple appendages. And if I wanted to go into it, this monster with these multiple appendages literally has what I would consider all the distractions that anybody would want to think of. If you want to consider all the distractions, one can look at the IRS, one could look at BLM, the EPA, drones, immigration, healthcare, housing, abortion. You pick your distraction. It really doesn't matter. These are the distractions, because the problem isn't abortion. The problem isn't energy or the DOJ. The problem isn't the corruption within government, the Iran nukes, state welfare, bailouts. Those aren't the problems. Those are the symptoms. The real problem is non-compliance to the Constitution. Welcome to the 1000th% Club. This is where we're going to gain knowledge and power, because knowledge is power. And by using our knowledge, we're going to be able to start leveraging this knowledge against those who are serving us, those who choose to go into that forum as our elected officials or appointed officials and raise their arm to the square and say, I swear to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States. That's the first thing that they say within their oath. Bottom line, the Constitution isn't some constitutional law. It isn't some case law and precedents, and it isn't some maze that requires lawyers to all agree on some previous case, some opinion that was rattled off by some judge. The Constitution is a simple contract, and that contract was written by the states and for the states. It isn't some ancient script that needs interpretation by some boys' club of lawyers, bureaucrats, politicians, and so forth. So bottom line, this contract is not being complied to, and that's what everybody is recognizing, and that's what everybody is failing to get their arms around. If we simply look at the contract for what it is worth, then we can't look at it as it stands alone. But before I get into looking at it as it stands alone, let me kind of put the scenario together here. The framers, when they got together and wrote this contract, they were really trying to improve the Articles of Confederation. And as a matter of fact, many parts of the Articles of Confederation were included into the Constitution. What the framers did was they had to set aside their differences of religion. There were some states and colonies that had real disagreements in theology between other states, the Puritans and the Anglicans and so forth. There was actually religious oppression going on throughout the colonies. Let me also say that these framers not only set aside their differences, but they had to set aside their self-interest. And in doing so, They made it so that their service was something that was going to guarantee liberty for their posterity. It wasn't something that they were going to create some great corporation or great body of wealth that they would be able to pass on to their children. These framers, these servants, these elected officials actually did this for the betterment of all mankind. So this betterment of mankind wasn't something that they just threw into a cauldron and created a democracy. What they actually had was a republic, and they were building upon a confederacy. This confederacy was given all the powers, and they limited the powers that were given to the Continental Congress. So when they went in to fix the Articles of Confederation, what they did was they created a true federation. But what they didn't do was they didn't create a sole federation. When one looks at the powers that were enumerated in the Constitution, one will realize that this federation was very limited and defined in scope. That's precisely why they did it the way they did it. As we look at these powers that are enumerated, most of these were left to the states, and we can read several documents from the framers that literally state that the states have all powers not delegated to the federal government, which means that the Confederacy was retained. They didn't wipe out the Confederacy, giving all powers and unlimited powers to the federal government. So the contract holds them to very specific powers. So interesting point in James Madison's Federalist Paper number 46, he says, were it admitted, however, that the federal government may feel an equal disposition with the states to extend its power beyond the due limits, the latter, which means the states, would still have the advantage in the means of defeating such encroachments. So what we're going to do through this program is we're going to go into the details of how we can actually overcome these encroachments or these appendages that I talk about that are all unconstitutional. When we get into the meat of the matter, unless the Article 5 process has been followed, any new role, responsibility, or power that has been created by the federal government is literally a usurpation of states' rights and states' powers. Bottom line, the Constitution is a contract. The only way we're going to be able to fix the contract is by using the fundamentals of contract law. Within a contract, the stakeholders of the contract have the ability at any point in time to call upon their subordinates within the contract and hold them accountable and say, you are not performing the duties and functions of this contract. Where did we give you the power to do this? Where did we give you the power to do that? Consider an ambiguous contract. If you had a landscaper and you hired the landscaper to come and make your home the most beautiful home on all the block, and you literally gave the landscaper the full power and ability to do whatever he needed. You said, I don't care what it takes, you make my home the most beautiful home as far as my front yard and backyard. I want them to be immaculate. You come home after your first day exercising this contract with your landscaper, and your home outside looks immaculate. You walk in your house and there's all sorts of tools, gas, and all sorts of supplies that the landscaper needs, and you call the landscaper up and go, what the heck happened to my furniture? And he goes, oh, it's in the garage. I'm using your house as a place to keep my stuff because you told me I could do whatever I needed. Our framers weren't that stupid. They actually came from a very despotic government fighting their liberation from the king and Britain, and understanding tyranny and the things that lead to despotism and tyranny. They very well took care of any of these things by creating an enumerated contract. In other words, by listing the only powers granted and delegated to the federal government. So, again, as the stakeholders, that's the states have the power to step in and say, these things are violations. What was more important is and as I've said this before, is the framers actually set aside their self-interest. And so one of the things that I think is going to be inherent in the success of reclaiming the Republic is that this doesn't become some big profit industry. This is literally supposed to be an entity in the same noble intent And one of the reasons I haven't just jumped on board with lots of other people that have tried to make this a money marketing industry or a place to make millions of dollars, the intent of this is to actually reframe and put the federal government back into the framework and scope of the Constitution as it stands today. Not to rewrite the Constitution, not to amend the Constitution. There's lots of efforts and there's good discussion that needs to occur regarding those things. But what we're trying to do with Reclaiming the Republic is just get the federal government back into the scope and framework of the Constitution. So there's no way I'm going to be successful if I'm going to try to make this $1 million industry to make myself rich. I do believe that I shouldn't be subsidizing, and I believe that there's lots of like-minded people that want to save this nation, and I believe that there's people that deserve the blessings as well in trying to do that and in supporting this. So this comes to the point of how do we get this funding and how do we get the support for Reclaiming the Republic? Well, it's going to come down to individual contributions. Look at the magic that Bernie had. Bernie brought in all sorts of money through his campaign. I think it's over 120 some million dollars were from small contributions of little communists, and most of them were probably using mom and dad's money, but they were still contributing in $5 increments, $20 or what have you. But there's people that are going to want to be able to be a part of Reclaiming the Republic. And so we're going to be setting up the ability for you to make donations on our website, reclaimingtherepublic.org. More importantly, we definitely need sponsors. We need advertisers that believe and want to get behind this and actually support the reframing of the federal government back into the scope of the Constitution. I can't think of a business that enjoys the fact that they've always got an unconstitutional government looking over their shoulder, making unconstitutional laws that are arbitrary, such as whether you're fulfilling quotas, whether you're fulfilling anything, because bottom line, if you look at the Constitution, there is no amendment that has given them the power to regulate labor. So what corporation wouldn't want to be able to, free themselves and actually free themselves from all sorts of burdens that the federal government levies upon them? Some of them are constitutional. Some of them may not be. So the Civil Rights Act is one of those things that actually is an amendment to the Constitution. And so there's nobody that should be able to be discriminated against because of those types of things. But again, this whole ferreting through the Constitution and what roles and responsibilities and powers have been delegated and what haven't been is a relatively easy process. But again, the framers had to set aside their self-interests, and so people have to come forward and start supporting this. And so we're going to use crowdfunding as a part of the funding process of this. And I actually have this plan mapped out in the strategy to convene a convention for Republic review. I just said a C word there that most people usually get the hair on their neck standing up. There are all sorts of conventions. Most people only understand a constitutional convention. And the Constitutional Convention is a convention where you write the base document. And in our particular process of the Constitutional Convention, that's how we got our Constitution. I'm not recommending a convention for a Constitution to be rewritten or to be amended, which would be the Article 5 process or an Article 5 convention, or what some people call the Convention of States. What I am recommending in my book and the strategy of getting there in my second book is the strategy to convene a convention for Republic Review. Republic Review is just a marketing sense that helps people kind of understand who's supposed to be doing it, the Republic. And what are they doing? They're reviewing, they're auditing the Constitution. Bottom line, this requires money. And so I don't mind, and my wife and I have been very blessed, and we're at a point where my wife supports me in this, and I support her in all the great things that she's doing. And so we've been blessed to a point to be able to try to initiate this process. If it be the Lord's will, then I believe Reclaiming the Republic will actually move forward and move this nation into its proper place as it should be, that beacon of liberty to all nations. So what I'm basically asking is that you start considering listening to the content of the show over the next few weeks as we start broadcasting every Wednesday from 12:30 to 1. Listen to the content. Tell me if I'm off key or if I am not stating an academic argument that we have to convene this convention for Republic Review. If you feel otherwise, then don't support this. but I truly believe you'll have a hard time finding any other constitutional solution that will actually rescope or reframe the federal government back into the Constitution. Now we want to take this time to go and recognize the sponsors that we do have by taking a commercial break. Rippey Homes believes that the American dream is not simply owning your home, but owning your dream home. Are you ready to upgrade, expand, or start your own custom home? If you are, I'd like to invite you to check out Rippey Homes at cgrippey.com. They offer end-to-end service from real estate to remodeling and specializes in custom homes, and they love to partner with their customers in making a difficult project worry-free. From the design to the moving in, they are with you every step of the way. If you have that dream home and looking to remodel, whether it's converting your kitchen and bath into your own heaven on earth or adding a new room, Rippey Homes has the tools, talent, and experience you can trust. So if you're ready to pull the trigger on a remodel or building that custom home, contact Cameron Rippey at cgrippey.com. That's cgrippy.com. So I've already introduced a new paradigm. The Constitution is a contract. Well, the Constitution as a contract doesn't stand by itself. Why is that? Well, in contract law, anytime that a contract is discussed and further defined, doesn't even have to be appended. It just has to be further defined where the definitions are elucidated or illuminated and or clarified in a contractual process. Those elucidations, clarifications, and illuminations are a part of that contract. It's one of the reasons why companies delete email where employees are either communicating with their partner or amongst each other, and they say, hey, I believe this contract means this, or I believe they're missing something in the contract, or we might be vulnerable to something in this contract, because those communications, as people are discussing that, are legally binding. And that's one of the reasons why many companies delete all emails, specifically contractual discussion emails, because they do not want to be found that these things were already known and or what have you, so that when it goes to court, the court can actually hold those contractual discussions, clarifications, redefining, or what have you against that company in the contract. Well, so let's go back to the Constitution. If the Constitution is a contract that was drafted and written by the states, did the states just wave a wand and agree to the Constitution? No. What ended up happening was the Constitution went back and it was debated and had to be ratified. So again, the Constitution was processed through the Republic. It wasn't processed through we the people. In a way, it was. Those people who had the ability to vote elected their delegates to actually go into a convention, another convention, there's the C word again, and at the state convention, it was called the Ratification Convention, and they ratified the Constitution. But it wasn't an up or down yes or no vote. They actually discussed it, and they found harm in some of the things that they believed were pernicious or they believed could be portals for the federal government to assume new roles and powers. And the interesting thing is that it wasn't these people working in a vacuum. Who was there to testify exactly what that line meant? It was the authors. Every state that had the delegates that were participating in the Constitutional Convention went back to their states and they actually said, this is what this line means. This is what this line means. Well, it sounds to me, and it doesn't sound to me actually, it really comes down to contractual law. These ratification debates are physical appendages to the Constitution. So if you want to understand what the Constitution says and what it means, read the ratification debates. The ratification debates have been obscured for well over 200 years, and the first person to obscure them was John Marshall. John Marshall knew what was being said in the ratification debates. And who's John Marshall? He was the Chief Justice that was appointed by Adams, and he basically made a lot of unconstitutional footings in his rulings, empowering the federal government unconstitutionally. And he knew it, and he was violating the Constitution because he participated in the Virginia ratification debates. So as we go through this process of digging through these documents, and as I make this academic case that this contract is ironclad and this contract can only be changed through one process and one process alone, that is the Article 5 process, I believe that most people reasonably informed, or reasonable people equally informed, will agree with me that we have to convene a convention for Republic review. I want you to also consider this, that as these ratification debates were going on, it was very clear that these framers and these participants in these debates were very, very afraid of delegating unbridled and unlimited power to the federal government. And yet, how do they have that today? And as I said, John Marshall created rulings that somehow granted through the process of case law, which the Constitution doesn't grant any allowance for case law. Show me in the Constitution where the Constitution can drift by judges. Had that been in the ratification debate, that the Constitution could drift by the opinions of judges, I would guarantee you that the states would have rejected the Constitution, would not have ratified it. And they stated that the executive could make new laws through executive orders, then I would guarantee you that there would be no way that the Constitution would have been ratified. The only reason executive orders exist, and Washington was the one that started doing executive orders, was he was basically communicating to his constitutional departments, and those departments were the State Department, the War Department, and the Treasury Department. He communicated to them how he wanted them to process their administrative duties and so forth. He wasn't creating any law. He wasn't interpreting law. He wasn't saying how we're going to enforce this or what have you. He was basically executing and faithfully executing the laws of the Constitution, the laws of Congress. So again, had these concepts been put onto the floor of all the states and said that the Supreme Court or the President of the United States were going to be able to inject laws and redefine what the Constitution would mean, they would have rejected it. So how is it that they do this today? Well, again, we'll get into that, and we'll get into very specifically the unconstitutional footings that Marshall started off with. But I think the greatest thing that I want to leave you with today is I want to ask you to read Madison's 1817 veto of the bonus bill. I'll give you a little background on this, and I'm going to cover this several times. But if you read the 1817 veto of the bonus bill, this is a bill where Madison was getting ready to step down as the President of the United States, and his fellow congressmen came over who he had worked with. They adored this man. They had the most respect for this man, and they came over to Madison's office and said, how can we create a hallmark legislation to recognize you for your great service? And Madison started telling his friends that what this nation really needed, and he was kind of telling them a pipe dream of what this nation really needed. And this pipe dream was that if this nation could improve its thoroughfare of moving commerce from the hinterland to its ports and back from the ports to the hinterland, in other words, efficiently and effectively moving commerce from the raw sources to the factories to overseas, back and forth, if we could move commerce more efficiently than anyone else, we would become an economic force that the world would never have seen and couldn't reckon with. And understanding that, as a matter of fact, Adam Smith stated that in The Wealth of Nations, that the United States had such unlimited potential as a republic in what we could do. He recognized that we would become the world's force regarding our capabilities in commerce, in competing in the world stage. As that said, Congress went across the way and they passed this bill called the bonus bill. And basically this bill was the initial steps of creating the Department of Transportation. Well, we have a Department of Transportation today. So obviously Madison signed the bill. Well, no, if you remember what I said, go read the veto. And if you read this veto, Madison clearly stated that Congress cannot assume the Supremacy Clause, they cannot assume the Necessary and Proper Clause, the Commerce Clause, or the General Welfare Clauses as portals to being able to assume this new role, responsibility, and power. That the Constitution is enumerated, and the powers that they're asking for are clearly not within the enumerated powers, and that the only way that they can create a Department of Transportation is to amend the Constitution by following the Article 5 process. So what he really wanted them to do was to write an amendment to send that out to the states and ask the states if the states would be okay with giving them this power, role, and responsibility of maintaining the waterways, highways, and so forth as they have assumed and usurped today. The states have yet to ratify any amendment granting that power, and yet we see that power clearly exists. And as a matter of fact, when one scratches one's head and looks at all the different departments that have been assumed and usurped, and you can't find the amendments, and you read Madison's veto statement, one can only conclude that all of these departments, all of these agencies and offices are violations of the Constitution if one looks at the contract and one considers whether the contract is being complied to or not by the subordinate, being the federal government. We're citizens, and even as naturalized citizens, the same oath is implied that naturalizing citizens have to take. We all have the duty and obligation to defend and protect the Constitution, and therefore I'm stepping forward and I'm asking you to step forward and support and defend our Constitution and get it to be recognized as the contract that the states are the overseers of, and that we have to get our states to step in and overtake this federal tyranny and get the federal government back into the framework and into scope of the Constitution. Once again, this program, Reclaiming the Republic, is brought to you by Mobius Strip Press. Our website is mobiusstrippress.com. That is mobiusstrippress.com. We're also launching reclaimingtherepublic.org. Spelt the way you'd say it, reclaimingtherepublic.org. Check us out, look at our content, and if you have any feedback, if you can't find the emails there, then just let us know via Facebook, and you can follow us on Facebook at Mobius Strip Press as well. And I would ask you to like us so that when you see our posts, you can actually read the constitutional perspective of how things are affecting us, both at a local level, at a state level, and at a republic level when we're not complying to the Constitution. God bless.